You betrayed me, and now you'll live with what that brings. After 25 years of marriage, I sat alone at our dining table, staring at 2 untouched plates of lasagna gone cold and a bottle of wine that had long since lost its chill. The candles I lit earlier in the evening had burned down to crooked pools of wax, their flames long dead. My phone glowed beside my plate, showing 17 missed calls, all unanswered. My wife, Laura. Happy anniversary, I muttered to no one in particular as I poured myself another glass of Merlot. It was the same bottle we'd brought back from Napa on our honeymoon, saved all these years for something special. The irony tasted sharp and unpleasant as it slid down my throat. My name is Michael Carter. I make a living fixing things that break. Air conditioners, heating systems, industrial refrigeration, anything mechanical, anything that fails when it's needed most. I've always been good at finding the source of a problem, isolating it, and making it work again. But somehow, I missed the warning signs that mattered most. I didn't notice my own marriage quietly coming apart. The house felt too large that night, every room echoing with memories that suddenly felt false. Laura had been staying late at the law firm more often than not, always citing some urgent case that demanded her attention. And then there was her sister, Diane, always whispering in her ear, always reminding her that she deserved more. More than a blue-collar husband. More than a man who worked with his hands instead of chasing prestige. Just thinking Diane's name made my jaw tighten. Laura's older sister. A real estate powerhouse in our suburb, flawless nails, perfect smile, and an opinion about everyone else's shortcomings. She'd never approved of me. From the moment Laura and I announced our engagement, Diane had made it clear she believed her sister had settled beneath her worth. The phone rang at 11:47 p.m. Unknown number. Mr. Carter, a calm voice said. This is Officer Alvarez with the County Sheriff's Department. We need you to come to General Hospital immediately. Your wife has been involved in an incident. My chest went cold. An incident? I asked. Is she hurt? She's stable, the officer replied. But she requires medical care. We located her at the Riverside Motel on Highway 9. The words barely registered at first, then they slammed into me all at once. The Riverside Motel. The kind of place that charged by the hour and didn't ask questions. I'm on my way, I said, already grabbing my keys, already knowing in my gut that something had died long before this phone call. Underscore 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 underscore. The emergency room smelled like disinfectant and exhaustion. Officer Alvarez, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and practiced movements, guided me through a maze of curtained beds. She was found unconscious in room 237, she explained. Appears alcohol was involved. The men she was with left before officers arrived. The men. Laura lay on the hospital bed looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Her carefully maintained blonde highlights were damp with sweat, her makeup smeared into dark shadows beneath her eyes. The dress I'd bought her for our anniversary hung crookedly off one shoulder, wrinkled and stained. Her phone buzzed nonstop on the bedside table. Ryan. 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 Of course. Ryan Cole, the smooth-talking tech consultant who'd been hovering around her firm for months. Late 30s. Expensive car. Confident smile. The kind of men who believed married women were just bored puzzles waiting to be solved. A young doctor stepped beside me. Your wife will recover, he said. She's dehydrated and intoxicated, but there's no lasting harm. We'd like to keep her overnight. I nodded, staring at a woman who suddenly felt unfamiliar. I understand. The police will need to speak with her once she's awake, the doctor added. There are questions about the situation. I'm sure there are, I said, my voice hollow. Laura stirred as I finished signing the paperwork. When she saw me, she burst into tears, not regretful ones, but sharp, frustrated sobs. Michael, I can explain. Can you? I asked quietly, pulling a chair closer. Can you explain why my wife is in a hospital bed, smelling like cheap liquor and someone else's cologne, after spending our anniversary in a motel with another man?" She turned her face away. "How long?" I asked. Silence. "How long, Laura?" "6 months," she whispered. 6 months. While I planned dinners. Bought jewelry. Talked about trips we'd promised ourselves. "I want a divorce," I said. Her head snapped back. "Michael, please. We can fix this. It was a mistake." "A mistake doesn't last 6 months," I replied. And just like that, 25 years ended in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and lies. Laura came home the next afternoon to gather some of her belongings. I was already waiting in the living room, the divorce papers laid out neatly across the coffee table like a map of a future she hadn't expected. She looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled back into a careless ponytail, her face bare, eyes red and swollen. She was wearing sweatpants and one of Diane's oversized sweaters, as if she'd already started disappearing into her sister's world. "Michael, we need to talk," she said quietly. "There's nothing left to say," I replied. "You need to sign those papers and decide where you're going to live. Diane's guest room isn't a permanent solution." She sat down slowly, hands trembling as she picked up the documents. "You're really going to destroy our family over this?" "I didn't destroy anything," I said evenly. "You did when you chose Ryan Cole over your marriage vows." "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." I leaned forward, keeping my voice steady. "You made a choice every time you met him. Every lie you told. Every late night you blamed on work. Those weren't accidents, Laura. Those were decisions." She began to cry again, but this time something in me stayed still. Whatever instinct I'd once had to comfort her had died back in the hospital. "Diane says you're being unreasonable," she whispered. "She says if you really loved me, you'd fight for us." "Diane says a lot of things," I replied. "She's been trying to break us up since our wedding day, and now she finally got what she wanted." "That's not fair," Laura snapped. "She just wants what's best for me." "She wants you as miserable and bitter as she is," I said. "And apparently, you're happy to let her win." Her tears turned sharp with anger. "You have no right to talk about my sister that way. She's been there for me when no one else was." "She's been there to poison you against your own husband," I shot back. "There's a difference." She stood up suddenly, the papers sliding to the floor. "This is exactly why I needed someone else. You're cold, sarcastic, and you never listen to what I need." "What you needed was a marriage counselor," I said. "Not a motel room. I needed a husband who cared about my happiness. And I needed a wife who didn't cheat." The words echoed between us, heavy and final. 25 years of resentment poured out in raised voices and sharp accusations, the conversation we should have had years ago, before lawyers and hospital beds and other men. "I never meant for it to happen," she said finally, her voice cracking. "Ryan listened to me. He made me feel alive again. And you made me feel invisible," I replied quietly. The truth hovered between us. Maybe I hadn't been perfect. Maybe I'd worked too much, assumed stability was enough. But none of that excused betrayal. "I'm sorry I wasn't the husband you wanted," I said. "But that doesn't make what you did okay." She nodded weakly. "I know." "Then sign the papers." She did. Her signature was shaky but clear. When she left, I called my lawyer to confirm everything was filed. Then I started packing her things, stuffing clothes and shoes into garbage bags with methodical efficiency. That evening, my phone rang. It was my daughter, Emily. "Dad, what is wrong with you?" she demanded. "Mom's in the hospital and you're throwing her out." "Your mother made her choice," I said calmly. "Now she lives with the consequences. She made a mistake." 6 months isn't a mistake." There was a sharp inhale on the other end. "Aunt Diane says you've always been controlling. She says Mom was suffocating." "Of course she says that," I replied. "Diane's been waiting 25 years for this moment. Don't talk about her like that." Emily snapped. "She's been more supportive than you ever were." I ended the call before I said something I couldn't take back. That night, my best friend Mark came over without asking. He owned a small construction company and had been part of my life since high school, the kind of man who showed up when things fell apart. "So," he said, surveying the garbage bags. "What's the plan?" "Divorce. Clean break." "What about your friends?" he asked carefully. "The Martins. The Lewises." I already knew the answer. "We'll see who sticks." The phone rang again. This time it was Tom Lewis. "Mike, man, we heard about Laura. How are you holding up?" "I'm managing. We just want you to know we're here for you," he said. "Whatever you need." Relief washed through me. Maybe I wouldn't lose everything. I was wrong. 2 days later, I saw Tom at the grocery store. He turned his cart around the moment he spotted me. "Tom," I called out. He stopped reluctantly. "Hey, Mike. Want to grab a beer later?" He shifted uncomfortably. "I can't. Laura's staying with Diane. We're having dinner with her tonight." The words hit hard. "She cheated on me," I said quietly. "I know," he replied. "But she's struggling. Diane says she needs support." "And what do I need?" I asked. He didn't answer. That night, Mark sat with me in the garage while I stared at the wall. "They're choosing her," I said. "Not everyone," he replied firmly. "I'm not." I finally smiled, not a kind one. "I'm done being the nice guy." Laura returned 3 days later to collect the rest of her belongings. I was waiting in the living room, the silence thick and deliberate. She moved through the house quietly, as if afraid any sound might provoke another argument. I didn't follow her. I didn't help. I let the walls we built together watch her dismantle what remained. By the end of the week, word had spread. It always does. Suburban neighborhoods thrive on whispered updates and shared speculation. Ambulances at midnight and police cars outside a familiar house were better entertainment than any television drama. Friends I'd known for decades stopped calling. Some sent awkward texts full of vague sympathy. Others disappeared completely. The pattern was obvious: people were choosing sides, and most of them weren't choosing mine. Mark was the exception. He came by almost every night, sometimes with beer, sometimes with food, sometimes just to sit and make sure I didn't drown in my own thoughts. "They don't want the truth," he said one night. "They want the version that makes them feel mature and compassionate." "Which means I'm the villain," I replied. "Which means they're cowards." The real test came at Emily's birthday party. She was turning 24 and insisted on celebrating at a trendy restaurant downtown, the kind Laura always loved and I always tolerated. Despite everything, Emily wanted both of us there. For her sake, Laura and I agreed to a temporary truce. I arrived early, hoping to avoid the awkwardness. I failed. Tom and his wife were already there, seated beside Laura like guards posted on either side. Their conversation stopped when they saw me. "Michael," Tom's wife said with a tight smile. "Nice of you to come. Wouldn't miss my daughter's birthday." Laura glanced up, her expression stiff. She'd lost weight. The confidence she once carried so easily was dulled by stress and exhaustion. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity, then I shut it down. Emily rushed over and hugged me, the tension in the room easing for just a second. "Happy birthday," I said, handing her a small wrapped box. She opened it and gasped. "Dad, these are beautiful. Just something to mark the occasion." I caught Laura watching, her eyes narrowing slightly. I didn't care. More guests arrived, including Mike Henderson, another longtime friend. He nodded at me but didn't come over. The message was clear. Dinner unfolded with forced politeness. I sat at the far end of the table, talking with Emily's friends, strangers who didn't know the story and treated me like a normal human being. From Laura's end of the table, I caught fragments of conversation drifting my way. Words like controlling, emotionally distant, unavailable. Diane's fingerprints were all over it. The breaking point came during dessert. Mike Henderson stood, raising his glass. "To Emily," he said warmly. 24 years old, intelligent, kind, and to Laura, for raising such an incredible young woman. The omission was deliberate. A few people glanced at me, uncomfortable, but they all drank anyway. Dad helped raise me too, Emily said quietly. Of course he did, Tom's wife said quickly, her tone condescending. We all know Michael loves her. I stood. Actually, I said, lifting my own glass, I'd like to add something. The table went silent. Laura's eyes widened in warning. To Emily, I said, who deserves better than watching her parents' friends rewrite history to make themselves comfortable. And to the rest of you, for deciding that adultery is understandable, but refusing to be betrayed quietly is somehow unacceptable. Michael, Laura hissed. Don't, I replied. Don't tell the truth. Now isn't the time, Tom said. When was the time? I asked. When you were having dinner with my wife after she cheated on me. When you avoided me at the grocery store. No one thinks you're a villain, Tom's wife said weakly. Then why am I the one who lost everyone? I asked. She needs support, Mike said. She made a mistake. A mistake doesn't last 6 months, I said flatly. A mistake doesn't involve motel rooms and lies. Dad, please, Emily whispered, tears forming. I looked at her, the pain on her face cutting deeper than any accusation. You're right, I said softly. This shouldn't be your problem. I turned back to the table. I don't need your approval. I don't need your lectures on forgiveness. And I don't need friends who excuse betrayal so they don't have to feel uncomfortable. I dropped cash on the table, leaned down, and kissed Emily's forehead. I love you, I said. We'll celebrate properly another day. I walked out without looking back. In the parking lot, my hands shook as I unlocked my truck. Maybe I'd made things worse. Maybe Emily would resent me. But for the first time since the hospital, I felt something solid beneath the anger. Self-respect. My phone buzzed. Mark, heard you went nuclear. Proud of you. Beers on me. I smiled, a real one. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't the abandoned husband or the villain in someone else's story. I was just Michael Carter, and I was done being pushed around. 3 weeks after Emily's birthday blow-up, I was sitting in my lawyer's office reviewing the final divorce settlement. The paperwork was thick, clinical, and impersonal, a neat little summary of how a 25-year marriage gets reduced to assets, percentages, and signatures. Laura wanted the house. The one I'd paid the mortgage on for 15 years. The one where I'd installed every light fixture, fixed every leak, painted every wall. She also wanted half my retirement account and spousal support for 3 years. She's legally entitled to it, my lawyer explained. Long marriage. Career sacrifices early on. I nodded. None of it surprised me. What Laura didn't know, what no one knew, was that I wasn't worried about money anymore. 2 years earlier, in my spare time, I'd started working on a new refrigeration system. Industrial grade, energy efficient, cheaper to maintain. I built the prototype in my garage while Laura was working late. Filed the patent 18 months ago. It was approved last week. 3 companies had already signed licensing agreements. $2 million upfront. Another $3 million projected in royalties over 5 years. Because the patent was filed after our separation date, it wasn't marital property. Laura would get half of the past. The future was mine. I was still enjoying that irony when my phone rang. Dad, Emily said. I need to tell you something before you hear it somewhere else. My stomach tightened. Go on. Mom and Ryan are engaged. The words hit hard, not because I still wanted her, but because of the speed. 2 months since the divorce papers were signed, and she was already planning a wedding with the men she cheated with. How thoughtful of her, I said dryly. Emily sighed. Dad, please don't do anything extreme. What kind of extreme? She says you've been acting unpredictably. I thought of the voicemails I'd left Diane, nothing threatening, just brutally honest. I have been unpredictable, I said. Just not in the way she thinks. We met at a coffee shop near Emily's apartment. I showed her the email from my patent attorney. She read it twice. Dad, you're rich. I already am. Her expression shifted from shock to understanding as I explained my plan. I'm going to buy Ryan's company. Her eyes widened. You're serious? Completely. Fire him. Then sell it to his biggest competitor. That's ruthless. It's legal, I said calmly. And it's deserved. Ryan ran a small tech consulting firm, 20 employees, modest profits. He'd been searching for investors to expand. He had no idea the venture capital group courting him was mine. Won't Mom figure it out? Emily asked. Eventually. But by then, it won't matter. The next morning, my phone started ringing before I finished my coffee. First call, Emily. It's happening. Mom just called me crying. Ryan got fired. His company was sold. Second call, Laura. I let it go to voicemail. Third call, Diane. You did this, she hissed. I know you did. I'm just an HVAC guy, I said mildly. Corporate takeovers aren't really my thing. You're sick, she snapped. Let me ask you something, I replied. For 6 months, you told everyone Laura deserved better. That she needed excitement. Well, she got it. Silence. She got a man who cheated with her. And now she gets to see what that costs. I hung up and poured another cup of coffee. Outside, the morning was calm. Bright. Clean. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. That evening, Mark called. You magnificent bastard, he said. Drinks are on me. For the first time since everything fell apart, I laughed. The fallout came fast. Laura called repeatedly, her voicemails growing more frantic with each message. Ryan's business had vanished overnight. His reputation followed it. Clients pulled contracts. Former partners stopped answering his calls. The man who once strutted through life with easy confidence was suddenly unemployed, scrambling, exposed. I didn't return her calls. Diane tried once more, leaving a voice message filled with fury and accusations. I deleted it without listening all the way through. The only call I answered that day was from Mark. You good? He asked. I am, I said, surprised to find it was true. A week later, Laura showed up at the house unannounced. She looked thinner than ever, her confidence stripped down to nerves and desperation. You planned this, she said, standing in my doorway. I planned my future, I replied. What happened to Ryan is a consequence of his choices. You ruined him. No, I said calmly. He ruined himself when he decided to sleep with a married woman. She stared at me like she was seeing a stranger. Maybe she was. I don't recognize you anymore, she said. That makes 2 of us. She left without another word. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of the Grand Marquis Hotel, waiting for Emily. Through the glass doors of the ballroom, I could see Laura and Ryan's wedding reception. It was small, maybe 50 guests. A far cry from the 200 who'd attended our wedding decades earlier. Ryan looked older than his years, the stress etched into his face. He worked freelance now, making a fraction of what he once did. Laura was paying most of their bills. She looked beautiful in her dress, but there was tension behind her smile, the kind that comes from realizing passion doesn't pay rent. Emily appeared at my side. Ready to go. Whenever you are. As we walked out, I caught Tom's eye across the room. He gave a hesitant wave. I nodded politely and kept moving. Do you ever regret it? Emily asked as we reached my truck. No, I said honestly. I regret staying quiet for so long. And Mom. She got what she wanted, I said. That doesn't mean she's happy. Emily nodded thoughtfully. You seem happier now. I am. We drove past the motel where everything unraveled. Past the hospital where I finally understood my marriage was over. Past the places where my old life ended. At a red light, Emily smiled. So what's next for you? I thought of the travel plans stacked on my kitchen counter. The business offers waiting in my inbox. The quiet peace of a life lived on my terms. Whatever I want, I said. The light turned green, and we drove forward, leaving the past exactly where it belonged. In the rearview mirror. This is where the story ends. How was today's story? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and where you're watching from. Like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories.